It's happy 30th birthday in America for the Sega Saturn this week. What are your favourite games and memories from that console, if any? Rich, were you present at E3 when they announced its surprise Shadow launch there? How was it? Cheers. John, going to go to you first.
Oh, the Sega Saturn, man. I love the Sega Saturn. I didn't actually jump in right away, though, but I got it about 1997. Because during that period, I was pretty hardcore PC for a little bit, right? Duke Nukem 3D Quake, that kind of pulled me in, and I came to the Saturn a little bit late, basically when the price dropped.
Right.
So, because it did not succeed in North America. I remember it launching there. I remember the hype around it. Hype. And then I remember getting soundly trounced with the PlayStation. But I loved the Sega Genesis so much that even though I appreciated the PlayStation, I liked it. And of course, I was really into PC as well at the time. You know, when the Sega Saturn price came down, I jumped right on. And boy, I had a blast. It was the first system I got into imports on. I also, because at the time games were so cheap, because it wasn't succeeding, I was able to get so many games for the Saturn and just experience so much for it. I had such a great time.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just, it got me excited about console gaming again, to the point that by the time the Dreamcast was getting ready to launch, I was on that hype train and bought the Dreamcast on day one. Wow. Because of all the fun I had with the Sega Saturn. And in the end, I ended up building a gigantic collection of Sega Saturn games, hundreds upon hundreds of them at this point. And it's a system I actually still play regularly to this day. I really love playing Saturn.
So where were you with the PlayStation at that point?
I had a PlayStation already at that point. I got that in 96, I think. And that kind of helped me fall in love, I think, with RPGs. I have to admit, I wasn't huge into RPGs during the 16-bit era. Then I played Chrono Trigger finally, and I really liked it. So the hype around FF7 got me. I played FF7 on PlayStation and on the PC, by the way, because I liked it so much. Yeah. I wanted to play the Voodoo enhanced version, although it had its own issues, unfortunately, as I discovered.
Mm-hmm.
But so I liked PlayStation. It was N64 I wasn't big on. I liked Mario and such, but I didn't get into that right away. I got that a bit later, quite a bit later, actually. In fact, I remember being the one that convinced two different friends, to sell their N64s and trade them in to get Saturns.
That's awesome.
Everybody at the store thought they thought they were insane. What are you, why? But in the end, I think, the Saturn stuff ended up being just overall more awesome. And also, if they kept it, and I don't know if they did, a lot more valuable.
Yeah. Right. Fair enough. Alex, what do you make of this? I mean, where were you with consoles at the time? I mean, the Saturn wasn't really on your radar, was it?
No. So I did not own any Sega consoles at all when I was younger. Those are things I played at friends' houses. That's where I got all the Sega experience I had when I was younger, including the Game Gear and stuff later on, which I thought was at the time I thought it was ridiculous. I had never seen anything like a Game Gear before. So no, and no one I know in my group of friends though transitioned to a Saturn. It was PlayStation and Nintendo 64. I remember looking in magazines and seeing it and being intrigued by it. But no, none of that. And that was also at the time where in my group of friends, it was in between PC and primarily Nintendo 64. And it never saw the light of day. So probably the first time I played a Saturn game was probably at John's house. With John. Probably was. Yeah, so, I think that's also the first time I ever saw Jaguar was at John's place too. It was I
don't believe that makes more sense.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
Sorry, yeah, it's all right.
I'm apologizing for John. Well, yes, I was at that E3. I believe it was 1994, 95. One of the two, I can't remember. It's a very, very long time ago now. But yeah, I mean, what can I say? Sega Saturn. It's interesting because obviously I was in an environment where obviously we'd had the Saturn for quite some time. So it would have been 95 because it debuted in Japan in 94. And in 94, the Saturn came along. We had Virtua Fighter at launch and that was good, but it wasn't quite as polished as people would have hoped for. And at the same time, the PlayStation came along, literally a week or two later, and it came with that super polished Ridge Ray support, and it kind of like combined with all of the stuff that was happening with the 32X at the time. The sort of perception, even from me working on an official Sega magazine, was, are these guys losing it? This is a real concern here. There seems to be some real errors going on here. And meanwhile, the developer feedback on the Saturn was not great. It really wasn't. I mean, some of the developers I was visiting, they were kind of like, didn't really know what to do with it. But let's put all of that aside and just consider what you got with that system. And what I loved about it was that it had its own identity, it had its own games, and those games were awesome, ultimately, especially the first-party stuff that appeared. And, the stuff that arrived from Capcom, the 2D fighters and stuff. There were so many great games for the Saturn. And perhaps unlike today, there was a reason to have a Saturn and a PlayStation. Because, yes, there was a crossover. And yes, the Saturn maybe performed poorly in those multi-platform games, but, those first-party games that arrived were just so good. And there was, the stuff like the lobotomy software games that came along. I spent so much time with Exhumed Power Slave. Incredible game, incredible times. And, you could quite happily have a Saturn alongside the PlayStation and enjoy the best of both worlds in the way that you can't really today with the PlayStation and the Xbox, because they are ultimately doing much the same thing and very, very similar catalogs of titles. So that was, that's my memory of the time. It was just good times, right? Great times, great gaming times. And yeah, there was always the sense that the Saturn was a bit of a mess technically, but the experiences that we had with it were just fantastic. But yes, just so many great games, so many great times, special times. So that's kind of like why the Saturn has a very special place in my heart. Favorite games, I think my ultimate favorite game on the Saturn would be Virtua Fighter 2. I just loved that so much. It was just so slick and so almost perfect in a way that VF1 wasn't. And it confounded the skeptics. I do remember reading in Edge magazine how they expected VF2 to be running at 30 frames per second on the Saturn. Nope. They used the facilities of that system to produce a fantastic port. Arguably the best fighting game on the system, I'd say, certainly in 3D.